5 p.m., May 4th, 2021. I call to order the Oconee County Budget, Finance, and Administration Committee meeting. Is there a motion to approve the April 13th, 2021 minutes?
Make a motion.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Discussion items. Fiscal year 2021-2022 School District Oconee County Budget Presentation. Dr. Thorson.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here, and Ms. Moore has worked really hard the last month or so. We got our school board to approve on first reading our budget a couple of meetings, well, it was a couple of weeks ago at their last meeting, and promptly the state changed the teacher salary schedule within 4 or 5 days after that meeting. So we did ask the board to come back for a special call meeting last Friday to update our request for you, and that's what Ms. Moore is going to present tonight. There are some small raises for employees. Of course, our budget each year is about 90% people. So for us to make changes in our budget, by and large, it would mean a reduction in people. And I don't say that to, as a scare tactic or anything like that. There are places I'm sure we could reduce some of our staffing if need be. But that 10% that's remaining, largely fixed cost. We do very little traveling in our district. We don't have much allocated there. Most of that 10% is locked up in utility bills and insurance payments. Workers' comp's pretty expensive for us, that kind of thing. Those aren't costs that we can just trim like that. So our budget is fairly fixed. I know a lot of questions have been asked about the federal payments with COVID relief. We call it ESSER on our side of the street, but the CARES Act money and the money that's come from the federal government as a result of COVID-19. We did get a $9 million allocation back probably November, December, somewhere around that time. And we're expecting to get another round of money from the feds that should be about $21 million. But that's not money that we can just use to pay our employees and replace salary. Now we're doing a little bit to try to help our general fund where we can, but y'all know whenever the federal government gives you money, they put strings with it and they say, here's some money, but you've got to spend it this way, or this way. We are trying our best to spend that in ways that will not create a funding cliff in 2 years when that money runs out. So one of the things they've asked us or allowed us to spend it on is any type of facility upgrade that improves air quality. So a good example, which Ms. Moore will give you the specifics shortly, but Seneca High School, built in 1991, 30-year-old HVAC system, and it was just time that whole system get replaced. In a 270,000 square foot building, that's expensive. So we're going to pay probably $5 million to replace the entire HVAC system. And we're talking all the piping, everything, the whole system. But that's money that essentially helps the taxpayers of Oconee County because it will not become part of our 8% budget, our capital money that we get every year. So anyway, we're working hard to stay within the millage levy that you guys have approved, and you'll see that's what our request is tonight, is that we have a flat millage and that we try to operate within that. And Ms. Moore is going to come give you the details, and then we'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
All right, good evening. I am just going to give you a little update from last year and talk about what we considered as we were preparing this budget, and then a little bit more about the federal funding that we've gotten. So we ended last year with a deficit, but not as big as we expected, $1.8 million. So our fund balance did drop to $21 million. And in the middle of our budget season last year, COVID happened, and we weren't able to completely finish that cycle. So we started this year with the same budget that we had in 1920. And we did project a deficit of $2.4 million. and we'll have to use our fund balance for however much of that actually plays out. I think we're in a better position than that at this point, but we'll see. So as Michael said, we got new information last week, and this is from the Senate Finance Committee. When they were meeting, they proposed an increase to the base student cost from $24.89 to $2,516. That is the Education Funding Act funds that we get on a per pupil basis. So that's very helpful. The Senate Finance Committee also had some other additional revenue that the House did not include, but we have not gotten any projections on that yet. So the revenue that is on your summary sheet will likely change. The Senate included a $1,000 raise for teachers with funding to cover that. There's an increase in health insurance of 2.6%. The 1% employer's retirement matching contribution, that's this year and next year. Then for the federal funding, we are getting 3 different allocations of that. The first round we got was about $2 million. We used that to purchase instructional software, technology, student devices, and personal protective equipment, and we've paid some salaries from that first round of money. And this is going to help us because the instructional software that we purchased, we bought multi-years, so some of that savings will show up in our budget for the 21-22 year. The ESSER II money, we do have improvements to the HVAC system at Seneca High School. We're also paying interventionists in elementary school to help with the learning loss. Those are positions that were in the general fund, and we're going to be using those, and it is for learning loss. It will help the students who are struggling. So we'll be using some money from that second pot of money for that purpose. And then the ESSER III money, which is, we don't know yet what we're going to be able to use that for. There's a webinar in the next couple of weeks that'll give us the framework for how we can use that. And so that is that. Some other just little details about the budget. We did include a 2% raise for our non-exempt employees. Those are our classified employees. And that is similar to what the Senate Finance Committee recommended for state employees. The salary increase for professional folks is $1,150, and the reason that it's not $1,000 is because on the teacher salary schedule, the local supplement is 15%, so anything that the state adds, we have to add an additional 15%. So we're extending that to teachers, our administrators, and others that are on the professional salary schedule that would be folks that have a 4-year degree. So we're able to save some funds in this, as I just talked about, the interventionist, that's $1.7 million. We reallocated some positions due to fluctuations in enrollment, so we've saved, and we've actually decreased by 11 FTEs. And then I talked about the multi-year software subscriptions and the ESSER I funding. That's about $268,000. Our total expenditures for next year is $106,705,304. Just a little bit less than the expenditures for this current year. So our actual request from local tax is $48,918,999, and from the state tax reimbursements, $19,348,198. So that is a slight increase from local revenue, $182,039, and we're hopeful that the value of a meal would cover that, so we would not have to have a tax increase. So our budget is balanced with the increase of the local tax revenue, the $182,000, because we're paying those interventionists in the ESSER funds, the $1.7 million, and because we're able to pay for those software programs for multiple years. That comes to about $2.1 million. So that would be our deficit if it were not for those savings and that ESSER money. And then just a quick look at our fund balance history. like I said, we ended last year $21,210,000. That's 20.9% of our expenditures. Our board policy is for 20%. So if this year were to play out as our budget is projected, our fund balance would be below what our board policy calls for. Yeah. So, you do have the summary sheet, and I did want to explain one thing, or a couple of things actually, on the local revenue. Typically, when I do the budget summary, I have not broken out the revenues and taxes. This year I did. I just subtracted it from that first line, so that's not a change, it's not a different number, it's just broken out. Also, you see our adopted budget last year is, if you add those first two numbers in the adopted budget together, they are less than the 22 projection. And the reason for that is when you passed our budget last year, you passed what's in that adopted column. But when we got to time to set millage, you left our millage, thankfully, at the same 116.5. So the number that I've included in there is the amount that 116.5 would actually generate. And that is information that I got from Christie. So I think that's a good number. So the actual difference from last year to this year is 628,444, and that is a combination of that additional revenue from last year plus the $182,000 that we need for this year to balance our budget. So, any questions?
Number one, I'd like to thank the school district for holding the line this year. I know it's tough. People are still recovering from economic disaster and from the tornado. And I also want to thank the school district because we're one of the few school districts in the country that went back to class full-time in person. I know it was tough. It took guts. But it was the right thing to do for the students and the teachers, and I want to thank you for that. Any other questions or comments?
I also appreciate the conscious effort with the federal money to not grow programs that's going to be an everlasting burden on the Oconee County taxpayers once that money goes away. Also, with what Mr. Elliott said, is the schools being open this year 5 days a week has played a big part in Oconee County local economy continue to go because people was able to go to work. And I appreciate the administration and the school board for having the courage to do that because I know that was not an easy decision, but I appreciate it. I know the community does as well. And I just have one question. So the deficit, the $2 million deficit, what's the long-range plan going forward on how we're going to close that deficit?
Sure.
So, I mentioned that we just can't spend the federal money, but I do want to explain a little bit about those, the positions that we did put in the ESSER II funds, which was the second round of our COVID money. We have interventionists at the elementary school. So Mr. Hamby does the allocations for a typical elementary school. Let's just say we had an elementary school with 500 kids. And he knows, we project every year how many of those are going to be in first grade, second grade, third grade. So we allocate teachers to that school based on how many they need for each grade level. So there might be 3 third grade teachers and 4 fourth grade teachers. But we also give that school some additional teachers that are there to teach small groups and things. So if we've got a group of kids in third grade that are really struggling with math, we might have an interventionist who will pull a couple of kids from this class, a couple of kids from this class, and they just work in small groups to try to get those kids caught up with their peers. Those are called interventionists. So the federal money did allow for us to, because of that learning loss category, we could pay certain salaries out of that. So the only reason our budget is flat is because we are going to use that COVID money to cover some of those salaries that ordinarily would be in our general fund budget. However, we have discovered a couple of issues where we're probably overstaffed in Oconee County. And one is we're going to have to really look at our special ed funding. The federal government is another one of those things that they fund us with is IEP, special ed students. They give us federal money to help fund, but it doesn't cover near enough. And our special ed, our count of students is about 5 or 6 percentage points higher than the national average. So the national average is about 14% of students have an IEP. That's higher, it's much higher here. It's about 20% here in Oconee County. If we can get that number right, and we need to, because I don't have any reason to believe that we have a much higher percentage of special ed students in our county than neighboring counties or really any place in the country should have. So we need to essentially find out what our issues are. Why do we identify more students than other places? And that doesn't sound like a lot, but 6% of 10,000, 600 students. If we don't have to have special ed programs for 600 additional students, that'll fix our budget problems. And we're going to work hard on that. That's something we've talked to our principals about in the last couple of weeks. I've met with our leaders in our special ed department, and we're going to get that fixed. But we feel like over the next 2 years, our understanding is that the COVID money, we'll be able to spend it through June 30th of 23. So we think over the next 2 years, we can kind of supplement, and that'll keep us afloat without going further into the hole, and we think we can have our budget balanced by then. So that's kind of where we are. Yep.
Mr. Chair, I just want to thank Dr. Thorsland, Ms. Moore, Mr. Hamby, and the school board for holding the line. It's been a difficult year for everybody, and for many reasons, but we appreciate y'all not asking for a taxing millage increase this year, and also appreciate you. Nobody knew what that was going to be like, sending kids back to school, whether or not it would work, but y'all have done a fantastic job against what seems like very high odds or bad odds. So appreciate that. And also doing what's right through science and medical guidance, not listening to Facebook, but listening to people who know what they're talking about. And I appreciate y'all standing your ground.
Well, I'm thankful it's turned out. I've told a number of people lately that I feel like we're kind of limping across the finish line. It's been a tough year, and maybe it took a little courage, but I kind of feel bad because the people who were really courageous were our teachers. They were the ones in a classroom with 20 kids all year. So I want to give all the credit to our school folks because they were the ones continuing to work hard. But I do feel strongly that we're supposed to be public servants. When we take people's money to pay our employees, we need to serve the public. And I felt like the best way to do that was by doing everything we could to keep our schools open. So I really am appreciative to our teachers, our principals, our custodians, our bus drivers. I mean, they're front line, and they deserve a real pat on the back. So it's been a tough year, but a good year, and we appreciate you guys. One thing I will add, we, of course, I don't necessarily like the way we do the budgets in South Carolina, where we don't know the value of a meal before we make a request. I don't know what's going to happen to the value of a meal this year. If it does go up appreciably, we would love to be able to keep our millage flat. That would help us with that $2 million that we're kind of in the red right now. So if the value of a meal should go up higher than the dollar value we requested, it really would kind of help offset some of that. So anyway, appreciate it.
Any other comments? Good. Thank y'all.
Thank you very much.
Continued fiscal year 2021-22 Oconee County budget discussion. Ms. Brock?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of this Budget and Finance Administration Committee. First, I'd like to request any questions that you may have had from the budget discussion that we had on April 13th, so that we may address those first and foremost before moving forward.
Chairman, I have one. The Greenway study, what exactly are we talking about this Greenway being placed?
That would be a part of the feasibility study, Mr. Durham. There are plenty of places in the county that could utilize either former utility easements, current utility easements, abandoned railroad easements. This would be the first step in identifying where the trail should be, how many phases the trail would take to implement and build, what the cost of it would be, and if it would be an interconnected trail with other local trails to lessen the impact on the cost of the study itself, but also to create increased accessibility for users.
Because that's my first question, because a lot of the ones want to model after they're using old railroad tracks. And, you know, they have a path there
Yes, there are a lot of counties that have a Rails to Trails program. There was some discussion when we did the 123 highway corridor study for using current and existing utility easements for a greenway trail on the eastern portion of Oconee County, beginning there. You have to look at right-of-way issuances, easements, and those sorts of things, and that's something that would require professionals' input. That's a scope of service that I don't believe that could be provided adequately at the same cost in-house.
Anybody else? If not,
Okay, since we have no questions about the April 12th edition, I think most of you brought your books. If not, there was a copy provided to you on the dais in front of you. You also have in front of you a packet of yellow sheets of paper. Just as a note, there were minor changes, most of them within the budget book itself that we did not highlight. There was an actual number that was like $12 off in a benefits line item in one department, and there was a overtime estimation cost that was $200 off. Those are a matter of housekeeping. I did not think that it would interest you or the public for us to go over the dollars and pennies per se. But those changes are reflected on the yellow sheets. They're just not highlighted on them. So I'm going to pick up where we left off again in council's initiatives and direction. And if you'll pull the last page of your yellow packet out, just want to highlight these things again. It's the very back page. And the reason it's the back page is the only change on this sheet is relevant to the last page of change in the packet. But I did want to go over this just one more time for council and the benefit of the public, that you have directed us as staff and prioritized as a council who establishes the budget and goals for this county on behalf of the citizens who elect you and those who didn't, for us to put an emphasis on public safety and law enforcement specifically, and fire and emergency services as a secondary nature. None of the position changes that was previously discussed on April 12th are reflected on the plain yellow sheet. The only change on the sheet came after our last meeting with you as a council from Mr. Wagner, who is the 10th Circuit Solicitor, noting the changes in law enforcement, corrections, and dispatch, and the increased amount that we have provided to the Public Defender's Office. Should we not fund the position in the Solicitor's Office, essentially what we will do is create a slowdown in the cog of the judicial system. So these things do need to work hand in hand. We moved some other funds around to be able to provide this financial resource for the Solicitor's Office for us to take the position of the administrative position out of the state side of their budget so that they could utilize the state side of their budget more effectively in court docket cases as the prosecution for all criminal activity here in the county. That's the only change on the position sheet. It does net in a $51,000 difference, but as we go through the rest of these documents for the changes from the 4/12 meeting, we'll show you where that money is reflected from. I just wanted to make that one notation because we, again, have highlighted and prioritized public safety and services to citizens regarding law enforcement and emergency services. And I overlooked that in the previous budget. Now, we didn't meet with the solicitor prior to the 12th But once he brought the information to me, and it's obvious, you all know how the court system works, and if we don't, I'd be happy to go over that as well. But cases cannot make their way in front of a judge without there being some involvement from the prosecution side. And that only makes sense that we should do that, providing the amount of law enforcement that we are increasing in the budget. So if you'll go back to the very first page, we'll go over the summary of changes since our last meeting.
Ms. Brock?
Yes, sir.
Just on that point, being that there's going to be, and I'm not suggesting that the Public Defender's Office needs any more, but have you spoken with them about
We
this?
did increase
Okay.
funding with the Public Defender's Office this year as well. Last year we funded a position in the Public Defender's Office. This year we're funding a position in the Solicitor's Office.
Thank you.
I do realize how very balanced that system is and how if it's heavy on one side or another, then it slows down the entire system. It won't matter how many arrests are made if we don't have an adequate way for alleged criminals to either be represented and or prosecuted. So it makes perfect sense for us to try to maintain the balance in the judicial system. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. So on our summary of changes, this is your first page. We have attempted to make this as easy and clear for you as possible. The page numbers on the far right coincide with the page numbers in the book that you have or the printout that is in front of you, whichever of those applies. As you'll see at the bottom, and I'm going to work my way from bottom to top, the only increase and the only change in this document from the entire budget document that you received on April the 12th is $165,000, for $165,410. Steve, you're not here. He said I couldn't talk slow. And as we're going to go up this, I'll explain to you where these changes came from, and if y'all want to do it page by page, that's fine. By us adding on the solicitor administrative assistant position, it did put us out of balance, so to speak, a little bit. And us doing the fine tuning on the real estate and vehicle collections in conjunction with the auditor's office, I believe that we have derived at a total that we can throw a dart at and hit pretty closely. We added $1,000 in the planning department. This is all based on the approval of the additional codes enforcement officer being added. With an extra position, there will be an extra need for there to be uniforms and equipment. We ran our numbers for advertising, community safety, and Oconee support. Again, moving up from the bottom, these are pages 43 and 35. We verified the numbers. Last year, we did have an increase in the advertising due to probate estate advertising, but we realize now that we overshot that by just a little bit, and we'd like to get that closer in line to our actual expected expenditures. The non-departmental community support has frankly been replaced by grants. Everything that we have needed through community support, utilize these funds in the past to supplement anything that ranged from firefighting gear to life jackets at county parks. As you all know, we've had a very active year in grants. I anticipate us actually doing a presentation for council about the number of grants Oconee County is currently working under. So we can reduce the amount of local funding for that because we have received enough federal and state money to match what we currently need to expend to provide this safety equipment. Our Health and Human Services through Oconee support, again, these are direct allocations approved by council for local nonprofit agencies and or local community agencies, and the requests have come more in line with the reflected numbers. There was a minor increase on page 31, which is the finance office. There was a letter received after the budget presentation on 4/12 requesting an increase in funds by $12,880 roughly dollars for there to be some software changes in our financial documentation software going to cloud-based, which increases the cybersecurity for that in the future. And again, the delinquent tax collector also had a late arriving contract cost related to software are also web-based. As you all know, last year, because of COVID, we had the delinquent tax sale at the Wahala Performing Arts Center. It was such a success for the people and us that I hope that we can do that again. By everything being cloud-based, it would eliminate us from having to preload all of our tax information to take over there, and again, increases that cybersecurity layer. Moving up again, page 12, there is a reduction in the administration line item for contingency. This was done to just create the balance for the budget. And as I mentioned to you all on April 12th in our last meeting, the 2% cost of living was the minimum. I heard several comments from council supporting a 3% cost of living if that could be accomplished. And it can be accomplished. It is an additional $216,000, as you see here on page 12. And these changes are reflective, again, going to top from bottom to top, with the changes made on page 4. The real estate values, again, this has been confirmed with the assessor, auditor, collections, treasurer. This is the best estimation we have. I do want to say that this still remains a conservative amount for estimation. As you all know, next year is a reassessment year, so any property values for construction material, for construction for residential or commercial occupied before December 31st, 2019, will be calculated in this collection rate. Anything after that, however, will be assessed at current year value or fair market value as was per building permit or property transfer. This estimated amount is $165,410 above what our estimation was on April 12th, but is more accurately reflective of our estimated revenues.
Any questions?
Mr. Chairman, I have one. The administrative contingency line item, $260,000. What do you use that for? Is that money you
I'm so
keep
glad
to?
someone asked,
Yeah.
Mr. Durham. Over the course of a year, this particular year in hand, but last year we used a lot for HVAC replacements. Hopefully with our new energy and efficiency upgrade contract, we will not be using them to randomly and relevantly replace every broken anything that comes around. We budget as best we can, as close to actual expenditure as we can for certain things in Oconee County. This past year, the contingency came into play with purchases related to COVID expenditures before we received any COVID money from the feds for personal protective gear that we distributed to every firefighter, volunteer, EMS. It even got to the point where we were supplying other municipalities with PPE because we were the only agency that could get our hands on it. Now, those municipalities have reimbursed us, but these are unexpected expenses. The other contingency is actually on your council agenda this evening. We have estimated the cost for the compactors to be $135,000. They in fact are $150,000. So we take $15,000 and add to that just to make sure that we are within the budget approved by Oconee County Council. Other contingency items may include anything that ranges from 99% of the time it's repairs to something. It's an unexpected repair. The road department, I think a while back, needed some lumber for building a secure area in the back for certain vehicle use. I've used contingency for many departments' needs. Printing usually has a use for contingency. We had some printers go down last year. These are the big plotter printers and not just like copier printers. $17,000, I think, for the one in the Register of Deeds right offhand. It's a miscellaneous list of things that occur that are unbudgeted, basically, or to supplement items that were budgeted. Because this specific year, the cost of things versus when we got the estimated cost for them, the increase in materials and supplies was utilized by contingency quite often.
Okay. I have another question.
Absolutely.
What's driving the additional park ranger at South Dakota Park? Because if I look at that cost, I mean, That gets us almost to another sheriff's deputy or emergency services personnel.
What drives the cost at South Cove is South Cove is open 365 days a year.
But you know, last year, I mean, I know we had a lot of visitors last year, but that was, we had shutdowns, we had COVID.
I don't think that's changing. We are able to look in advance since we have the contract with Reserve USA. We are booked at South Cove for an extended period of time. Now, you can't book for more than 1 year in advance, but on January the 6th this year, when we start looking at the bookings, there were one every 8 minutes at South Cove. The number of people visiting Oconee County parks is going to explode again this year. We can already tell from the indicators. The position at South Cove, we had an increase in our collections for the local accommodation and the state accommodations tax last year. Previous year, we were able to fund a portion of a position at Shaw-Ram County Park through the ATAX funds because it was an operational fund that we could utilize at that time, but it does not allow for the funding of consistent staffing. We still use ATAX funding to supplement, so if you look in South Cove or any of the parks for that matter, under their professional line item, it's about a third of the way down the page. We do utilize staffing agencies for part-time and seasonal summer help, but we supplement the salary that's paid through Staffmark or the providing agency with ATAX funds for overtime, additional hours, safety equipment, and that sort of thing.
Any other questions? Very good. Thank you, Ms. Brock. Anything else?
No, sir. If there are no other questions, I just would like to say that we do have our first reading of the budget on May 18th. And without any objection, we will include the information provided on the yellow sheets into a new budget book so that it is clear and easier for the public to read. And these will be included in our backup from tonight for a presentation for first reading.
Thank you.
Sir, thank you.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
Make a motion.
Second.